There may come a moment when attention begins to notice something that had always been present, but rarely recognized directly. For most of life, the mind may have been completely absorbed in what it was thinking, feeling, remembering, or anticipating. Thoughts appeared and attention moved with them. Emotions appeared and attention followed their movement through the body. In this way, experience felt continuous, as though the mind and what it experienced were the same thing. But as awareness begins to stand more clearly within itself, another possibility quietly becomes visible. Thought can be observed. A thought appears, instead of immediately becoming involved in its meaning. Attention simply notices that the thought has appeared. Then another thought arrives. It too is noticed. This may seem like a small difference at first, yet it reveals something very important. If a thought can be observed, then the observer cannot be identical to the thought itself. For a long time, the mind may not have considered this distinction. Thoughts appeared and were automatically treated as the center of experience. If a thought said something about who you were, that description felt like reality. But when attention begins to observe the movement of thought directly, it becomes clear that thoughts behave like any other appearance within awareness. They arise. They remain for a moment. Then they fade. The same pattern can be seen with emotions. A feeling arises within the body. It moves through sensations and energies that may feel strong or subtle depending on the moment. Yet if attention remains present, the feeling also begins to shift and eventually dissolve. Even the sense of identity appears to follow this pattern. A thought arises describing who you are. Another thought confirms it. For a while, this description may feel solid. But sooner or later, another thought appears that slightly alters the story. Identity changes shape again. When this entire movement is observed carefully, something very simple begins to reveal itself. All of these experiences are being noticed. Thoughts are noticed. Feelings are noticed. Sensations are noticed. Memories are noticed. Yet the presence that notices them remains quietly consistent. It does not arrive and disappear in the same way that thoughts do. It does not fluctuate in the same way emotions do. It is simply present, aware of whatever happens to appear. This presence does not interfere. It does not judge what it sees. It does not try to force experience into a particular direction. It simply observes. For a long time, the silent observer may have been overlooked because attention was almost entirely occupied with the content of experience. The mind was busy following thoughts, reacting to feelings, and organizing the story of life. But now something different begins to happen. Attention turns slightly. Instead of only observing what appears, it begins to notice the simple presence that is observing. And in that quiet recognition, the silent observer begins to reveal itself, not as something mystical, not as something distant, but as the very awareness that has been present throughout every moment of experience. As attention begins to recognize this silent presence more clearly, another subtle change may start to occur in the way experience is perceived. For a long time, it may have felt as though every thought demanded participation. A thought appeared and the mind immediately followed it, exploring where it might lead, agreeing with it, resisting it, or building another thought in response. In this way, thought created a continuous stream of mental movement. One idea led to another, One interpretation led to the next, and attention was carried along with the entire flow. But when the silent observer becomes visible, the relationship with this movement begins to shift. A thought still appears, yet instead of automatically entering the chain of thinking, attention simply notices the thought itself. It is seen in the same way that a sound might be heard. It arises. It exists for a brief moment. Then it fades. Another thought may appear immediately afterward, but now it too is simply observed. This does not require effort. The observer is not trying to stop thoughts from happening. Thought continues moving exactly as it always has. The difference is that attention is no longer completely absorbed within the movement. There is space around the thought. Within that space, the thought becomes visible as an event rather than as an unquestioned reality. For a long time, the mind may have believed that every thought required evaluation. It needed to be analyzed, improved, corrected, or defended. But the silent observer does none of these things. It does not argue with thought. It does not try to replace one thought with a better one. It simply notices the entire movement. Thought arises. A reaction may arise with it. Perhaps agreement. Perhaps resistance. These reactions are also noticed. Then they pass. In this way, the observer begins to see the full structure of mental activity. A thought appears. Another thought responds to it. An emotion may follow. A memory may appear supporting the emotion. All of these movements arise within the same field of awareness. For a long time, the mind identified itself with the activity inside this field. Now the field itself becomes more apparent. The silent observer is not located within any particular thought. It is not contained within any particular feeling. It is the open awareness in which all of them appear. And when this becomes clearer, something interesting begins to happen. The urgency behind thought begins to soften. Thought may still speak, but it no longer carries the same authority. It becomes one movement among many. Sounds appear. Sensations move through the body. Thoughts arise and fade. All of them unfold within the same silent awareness that simply observes their movement. The observer does not try to control the flow of experience. It does not attempt to shape what appears. Its nature is simply to see. And as attention begins to rest more naturally in this seeing, the silent observer becomes less like an idea and more like a direct recognition. It has always been here, quietly present behind every thought, behind every emotion, behind every moment of experience. Now simply noticed. As attention becomes more familiar with the presence of this silent observer, another subtle discovery may begin to unfold. For a long time, it may have seemed as though the observer itself needed to be created through effort. The mind might try to maintain a certain state of awareness, trying to stay attentive, trying not to get lost in thought again. This effort can feel like progress. The mind believes it is learning how to observe. But if this process is watched carefully, something interesting begins to appear. The effort to maintain awareness is itself another movement of thought. A thought appears saying, Stay aware. Another thought appears, evaluating whether awareness is strong enough. Soon the mind begins measuring its own observation, trying to improve it, trying to sustain it longer. Yet the silent observer itself does not require this effort. Awareness was already present before the thought about maintaining awareness appeared. Even when attention seems lost in thinking, awareness is still there. The mind may say that awareness disappeared, but what actually happened is that thought simply occupied the center of attention for a moment. The observer did not leave. It remained quietly present, noticing even the movement of becoming lost in thought. Seeing this changes something fundamental. The observer is not a skill that must be constantly maintained. It is the natural condition in which experience is already happening. Thought may move in many directions. Attention may sometimes follow it. At other times, attention may simply observe it. But awareness itself does not come and go with these shifts. It remains present through all of them. This realization brings a surprising sense of ease. The mind no longer needs to struggle to hold awareness in place. Awareness was never something that needed to be held. It was always the space in which holding and letting go both occurred. When this becomes clear, observation begins to feel effortless. Thoughts appear. They are noticed. Sometimes attention becomes absorbed in them. Then another moment arrives and the absorption itself is noticed. Nothing needs to be corrected. Nothing needs to be forced. The observer simply remains present with whatever movement appears. This simplicity reveals something important. Awareness is not opposed to thought. It does not need thought to stop. It simply sees thought for what it is, a movement within the field of experience. And because the observer does not resist the movement of the mind itself may gradually begin to settle. Not through discipline, not through control, but through the natural clarity that comes from being seen. The silent observer continues to reveal itself, not as something separate from experience, but as the quiet presence in which all experience unfolds. As observation continues without effort, another subtle shift may begin to unfold. At first, the silent observer seems to be watching thoughts as if they were separate events appearing within the mind. A thought arises, it is noticed, and then it fades. Another thought appears and the same quiet observation remains present. This can create the feeling that awareness is positioned somewhere behind the activity of the mind, watching what happens from a distance. But if this process is explored more closely, the sense of distance itself begins to change. It may start to become unclear where exactly the observer is located. When a sound appears in the room, it is simply heard. When a sensation appears in the body, it is simply felt. When a thought appears, it is simply known. None of these experiences seem to require a specific location from which they are observed. The idea that awareness must be positioned somewhere begins to loosen. For a long time, the mind may have assumed that there must be a center from which observation occurs. It may imagine awareness sitting somewhere behind the eyes or somewhere within the head, quietly looking outward at the world. This imagined center feels natural because thought constantly refers experience back to a point it calls me. But when observation becomes very quiet, that center becomes difficult to find. Sounds appear without needing a listener to receive them. Sensations appear without needing a separate owner to feel them. Thoughts appear without needing a thinker to create them.
Everything simply arises within the same open field of experience. The observer does not seem to stand outside of what is happening. It is inseparable from the very act of experiencing itself. This discovery can feel unusual at first because it challenges a deeply familiar assumption. The mind is accustomed to dividing experience into two parts: the one who observes and the things being observed. This division seems obvious in daily life. There appears to be a subject and an object, a watcher and something being watched. Yet when attention becomes very quiet, the line separating these two begins to blur. A sound appears. Awareness of a sound appears at the same time. They are not two different events. They are one single happening. The same is true with thought. A thought arises and immediately it is known. There is no delay between the appearance of the thought and the awareness of it. They arrive together as one movement. This begins to reveal something profound. The observer may not actually be separate from what it observes. What seemed like two different things may be one continuous unfolding, experience appearing, and awareness of that experience appearing at the same moment. When this is seen, the act of observation becomes even more natural. There is no need to stand back from experience, no need to distance yourself from what appears. Observation is already happening within the experience itself. The silent observer is not outside the movement of life. It is the openness within which life is continuously unfolding.